impose on the future. So in a static model, we think, let's get the resources out that we can in each time period. And we think in each time period, we'll just fish that same amount. Right? So we will fix how much to fish in each year, let's say. And then we'll say each year we will fish that much. If we have the dynamic models where we usually introduce the interest rate, we have some positive discount rate, we have some economic desire to have some profit sooner, we're going to harvest a little bit more in the current time period. And in the case of resources, leaving some, we motivate it by, do we leave some coal in the mine, do we leave some redwood standing? So if we harvest everything in the current time period, then we are imposing this marginal user cost if we don't leave some to be consumed in future time periods. So there's some value of leaving some of the resource for future time periods. This marginal user cost, like we said before, is a way to balance across time periods. We're discounting a stream of benefits. We want to have benefits equal, the discounted benefits to be equal across the different time periods. And the marginal user cost is that cost that shows us what the value of leaving some in the resource would be. But the dynamic model pulling more towards the current period gets us closer to the maximum sustainable yield. And the danger is if we have a high level of extraction and we're close to the maximum sustainable yield, we're harvesting at this really high rate. If we have some external shock, a weather shock, some pollution, or some, just the ocean changes over time, the fisheries have different growth rates different years, we could have a high level of effort, and the maximum sustainable yield could actually move, and we could be harvesting more than the maximum sustainable yield for a couple of time periods, and we can lead to a big crash in the fishery. And this is what's happened a lot of times where people get the capacity out there to fish a fishery at a really high rate, but then something else happens to the fishery, storms, currents move, and then fishing at that really high rate drives the stock down drastically. So as I tried to say before, we think about this efficient solution, the efficient allocation of resources, as if one single owner owned the fishery, if it was a monopolist. If there was a single owner, they could do the point that maximized the net benefits. We think about fisheries, but we have, for a lot of different resources, terrestrial resources too, we have a common property resource. One thing we've already talked about is grazing, where you have the common grazing land. Each individual could put one more goat on there and just get a little bit more in their herd. It would be efficiently grazed if there was one person owning the pasture, but you say common property resource, it gets overgrazed. Each individual could add just one more. In the case of fisheries, each individual could just fish a little bit more. So the question for policymakers is how to get the fishers, this is the gender neutral fisher people, how to get the fishers to stick to a monopoly single owner solution. Right? How can we coordinate the people fishing? There's profits. Remember, there's no profits. There's no net benefits at the open access case that there is. So how do we get them to stick to this monopolist solution where they can divide up some of the net benefits, some of the profits? So as I said, we usually end up at this point where net benefits equal to zero, where costs equal to revenue, and there's a whole lot of boats and a whole lot of people working in the fishery. And how do we get them to this point over here? So this is a little bit confusing. I'm going to try and motivate it. This is looking at the single owner solution like a monopolist, like the graph that we did back in the theory of the firm and the monopolist. So down here we have curves for marginal revenue and marginal cost. We have marginal cost being flat and marginal revenue being this downward sloping line. We have average revenue and marginal revenue, and this is how we did a solution for the monopolist. Was the monopolist solved that marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but was able to get the profits from average revenue at that quantity. So we were able to set quantities here, and this was a monopolist profit in the theory of the firm. If we think about this in terms of the fishery, if we're out here at the point where net benefits equal to zero, this is the point where average revenue equals average cost. That's sort of by definition why profits are diffused. And if we can get to this point, this is the point where marginal revenue is marginal cost and average revenue is quite a bit higher. Average revenue being a line like this. So average revenue being quite a bit higher, this would correspond to some monopoly profit, monopoly rent. This is if we could restrict the amount of fish that are getting caught to what a monopolist would do, there's somehow that we can distribute this chunk to the fishers in a way that they think is fair and that they would buy into. They would be getting more profit than to be at this point with zero profit. One thing that's very tough about this and the actual political reality is that in many fisheries, this out here is a lot of boats and a lot of jobs. And if we move from here to here, we need to drop a lot of boats and we need to drop a lot of jobs. Right? We need a lot less people working in the fishery, and we need a lot less boats sitting at the dock. And the way that fisheries regulation has been so troubling is that the boats are at the dock, the men are looking to go out, and they put a lot of pressure on the regulator to let them fish more and more. It's very hard to get back to these points. Only recently have we been able to sort of muster sort of a political capital and sort of a consensus with learning the science that there's some way to get back to these points. So what are the policy solutions? So in the past, there's been raise the cost to fish. Okay? There's been let people fish less of the time. There are certain fisheries that get to the point where they're only allowed to go out one day. Or there's fisheries in Alaska where they open up the fishery for a few hours, right? If this was managed at the efficient level, you could have the fishery with just a few boats open all year or open for months, and it would be a lot safer, there'd be a lot less capital involved. But when there's so many boats and so many people there on top of the fishery, they say, okay, you can only catch the salmon in this bay in Alaska for, from midnight until noon on this day. It's called a fishing derby. When you have too much capital out there, people are racing to catch the few fish that they can. Another big one is aquaculture. So this is like a monopoly approach. You have a piece of land where you flood it. This is now how we get a lot of fish. Catfish, tilapia, there's a lot of fish in the store now that come from, changing the fishery from a common access out in the open ocean into something that's actually efficiently managed, inputs, outputs, manage the revenue stream. Policy solution is often taxes. This is, again, increasing the cost of fish. The hard thing here is this is a big transfer from the fishers to the governments, and the fishers are usually pretty organized to keep this from happening. But the big innovation that's happening now, and I'll talk about this for a few slides and show some graphs about this, is this idea of transferable quotas. This is like when we talked about pollution, where this idea of you set the amount that's going to be used, and you distribute it among the people in the fishery, and they can set prices, and they can buy it and sell it, and then it's going to get at their costs, their underlying costs. So this has a bunch of policy questions. How do you distribute the quota? Who gets the quota? But the idea is you manage it like a monopolist solution. You get to the efficient point, and you distribute shares of the catch and shares of the profit to different people who are going out there. You buy the right to catch fish, but it's a small enough number of fish that there's guaranteed to be some profits. You're also sort of buying the rights to profit from that fishery. Another thing that's happening right now in management is fishery reserves. So if we have the coast of California, and there's different harbors, and there's different natural areas, we could have some fishery reserves where the fish don't get caught. They go in there, they can multiply, they can reproduce, they can find each other, and then they can come out into the places that are actively fished. So dividing up a coast or dividing up an ecosystem into areas that are preserved for no fishing, where the fisheries can sort of recover from overharvesting, and then there's outmigration into the area that restock the areas that have too much fishing in them. The permits we did for pollution. Yeah, I'll talk more about that. Yeah, the quotas are different, but just the basic idea of like make a cap and then distribute within that cap. But I'll talk about it some more. But ask me again. It's confusing. So here's raising the cost of fish. So as I said, you can close fishing areas. There's fishing seasons. There's only certain days you can fish. You can also change how people fish. So what types of nets people use, whether people are forced to use long lines or nets. So there's a lot of this in inshore fisheries. There's a lot of very specific things of how people can fish. If you go to the Berkeley Pier, you can only fish with certain types of gear. You can only catch certain numbers of fish. Certainly in recreational fisheries, there's tons of this stuff. You can only use certain types of gear. There's fly fisheries where like you can only do catch and release or barbless hooks. That's more like a recreational thing. But in commercial fisheries, there's like your boat can only be a certain size. You can only put out a certain number of traps for crabs. There's a whole bunch of ways you can limit fishing. But in a lot of ways, this can end up leading to what's called overcapitalization. Overcapitalization is too many boats, too much gear. Right? So what has happened in Alaska, in the place where they have these fishing derbies, where a fishery, they'll be going up and down the coast, the fishery in this one day will only be open for a certain number of hours. There's a whole bunch of boats. They're all ready to go, and the bell rings at midnight, and they all go out, and they're all on top of each other. So there's too many resources being put into this. It's not efficient because the shorter and shorter window has just brought more and more boats with more and more ability. And if you limit these fishing techniques, that doesn't mean that more and more people, there's a whole bunch of ways that you would need to raise barriers to enter a fishery. Only a certain number of fishermen, only a certain number of boats, only a certain number of gear, but there's a whole bunch of ways that people will go around and just get better and better at increasing the capacity to fish. Aquaculture, as we talked about, it's a single owner. You're basically giving leases. If it's done inland, it's done by the land that you do it on. If it's done in the ocean, the government does it through providing leases where a single farmer can manage a lease. You can sort of maximize things to get pretty high levels of productivity. You seed it, you grow it. There's some problems with aquaculture where whether or not you have to feed it. There's some like salmon fisheries where there's some salmon fisheries where the salmon naturally grow and depends on the nutrients that are in the water, but there's other areas where they feed a whole bunch of feed, so that has big ecosystem effects. But around this area, if you guys ever go out to Point Reyes or Tomales Bay, you can go to the oyster farms. Totally recommend it. Really nice weekend outing. You can go to the oyster farms. You can see them growing the oysters out there and buying the oysters right there. And they've been able to sort of successfully bring back a commercial fishery. It's on a small scale, but it's really well done, and the setting's really natural. And so there's a lot of places where there's the possibilities to do aquaculture well are there. And these are, again, this is like a monopolist. You have a government lease that gives you exclusivity. As long as the government manages how many leases are out there, how much of the ecosystem can handle, they're giving little bits of the ecosystem to single managers who can do things efficiently. Ranching is a thing that's really interesting. If any of you like sushi, supposedly much of the tuna that we ever get at sushi, there's boats out there that are fishing and catching the smaller tuna, and now they keep them live and bring them in to sort of like closed off bays, and they grow the tuna to full size. So it's not like aquaculture, like they're still hammering an open access resource to catch the wild tuna, but they're bringing them in and growing them, fattening them up like a feedlot, like you would think of a cattle feedlot. There's a lot of questions, this is like slightly more efficient, but the open access fishery that's feeding these is often so hammered that it's not quite a sustainable thing yet. But the global demand for sushi and for the tuna and sushi is huge. So this is sort of like an intermediate state that we're at. It's like half wild system and half managed system. The government also manages a whole lot of fish hatcheries. This is a big story in the salmon case. We talked about dams. Dams' impact on salmon almost always in the West, not almost always, but in many cases when they built a dam, they built a hatchery to mitigate the effect on salmon. So you're managing a local population by increasing the growth and birth rate of the local population. So you have a little mini factory at the bottom of your dam that's growing baby fish so that you hope enough of them survive. You're mitigating the effect of the dam. And this is something we have 50 or 100 years of history on. There's taxing, how to increasing costs through taxes. Taxing often means taxing the effort, not the catch. Making people buy permits to enter the fishery. So every boat needs a license. Every fisherman needs a license. There's fisheries like lobsters and crabs. Each trap needs to have a license. If you have 500 traps, you pay a tax per crab trap. Sometimes these can just be used as a limit, like they don't give out more fishing licenses or more trap licenses, so they're just a way to limit the total amount of effort. But to the extent that they're taxes, it does bring this thing where there's a big transfer going on from the fishermen to the government. And then it's hard. Fishing is out there, done very disaggregate and discrete. It's very hard for the government to monitor effort and monitor what people are actually doing. A whole bunch of fishery regulations that are in place that are very, very hard for anybody to ever monitor. There are boats that go out in the Gulf of Alaska, and they, regulators jump off the boat and get onto your fishing boat, and they can measure different things and licenses. But that monitoring and enforcement is minimal in terms of how much you can effectively do. So quotas. So this is sort of what the economists love to promote and sort of say is the future and sort of what we think would be a way to do things more rationally if we could figure it out. So it's like permits, as I said before. But it's interesting, quotas can be put onto the catch instead of the effort, right? So you can have the quota to land a certain amount of fish. It's not just to go out there. It's not just to have a boat. That can be a problem because then you can have people having more boats or more nets. You have the right to sell a certain amount of fish at the dock, right? So it's for the amount that you've already caught. So there's less of a rush. You don't have to rush out there and be the first person to catch it. You just need to know that you're going to bring it to the dock at some point during the season. And that, letting people to distribute their resources out over a longer season rather than to pack it into a race to catch the fish before somebody else has a whole bunch of sort of biology and ecosystem consequences that are good. There's distributional questions. How do you distribute quota? We saw some of that in the tradable permits thing. Do you give people 50-50? Do you scale it to the size that they were doing it before? Do you say everyone in the fishery gets a little amount? What's the right way to do it? So you can see there's plenty of first cases where they say how, an average of how much you fished or landed over the last 5 years. We're going to distribute the quota according to that. But that's also a distributional thing. The bigger guy gets more quota and the small guy gets less quota. So there's different ways to manipulate that. And then suppose this is a chunk of profit, right? So there was a square there that was like some monopoly profit. And we need to make sure that sort of there's a fair way to distribute that chunk of profit that everybody involved in the fishery will be, feel like they're stakeholders in, will feel like they have a reason to participate. So what happens in common property is when you're like, well, those people are getting the profit, I'm gonna add more resources or fish more, add more effort. You want the profit to be distributed in such a way that everybody who's participating will stick to the rules. And then finally, there's this question about reserves that I try to motivate. It's a geographic thing. Here in the Bay Area, so here's Marin, Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco. So we have the Gulf of the Farallones out here. We have some protected areas for wildlife. There's sharks and whales, and we have a whole bunch of reasons we have it as a protected area. But then the biologists can go and see how having certain protected areas will increase the ability of fisheries to recover. In the bay, so we have a crab fishery here that's very important. Inside the bay, there's no fishing for crab. You have to cross out of the Golden Gate in some perimeter around the Golden Gate, and that's where you can fish for the Dungeness crab. Right? So the juvenile crab are reproducing a lot safer inside the bay than they're coming outside the bay and filling up this area that's our fishing area. Some of these things are done inadvertently, some things are done purposefully, but we have biologists working with the fisheries manager more and more now, and they're able to sort of see fish populations in a bigger picture and able to do this better and better. This is sort of also something that's moving forward. You can also do fishery zones. So say the coast of California, you can divide it up and let people fish in different zones at different times of year. And important biological models, they say fish during times of year where the fish aren't reproducing. Let them leave the fish alone during the period where they're reproducing, allow the fishing to come when they're not reproducing. So here's the chapter 17 has just some numerical examples illustrating this. As I said before, there's a lot of Sweden and Norway in this book. I think the authors have done some collaborative work over there. So we have millions of metric tons of herring. Here is the carrying capacity. This is the total, the highest the population would ever get, to 3.2 million tons. We have the peak here, the MSY point. That corresponds to 1.6 million metric tons, and that, importantly, corresponds to this growth rate. So there's a growth rate at 64,000 metric tons that's getting added each year. That if you were to get the highest level of catch, this would be the highest possible level of catch. If you caught 64,000 metric tons each year, the fishery would regrow exactly that much each year as you caught it. Right? So if we were managing the fishery for the greatest amount of fish to be caught, this would be we would be at the dock, and we would be working with the wholesalers to see how much fish is actually getting landed. And as you can see, there's a mathematical function behind this coming from a population model. So then they're going to get us to the catch model. So here we're still in the stock and yield. We're still in the population model, the biological model, but then we're going to do 3 different levels of effort. How many boat years? And so as you can see, this is 1x, this is 2x, and this is 4x, basically. So how many boats are we going to send out there to work in the fishery? And what that's going to correspond to in terms of how much fish are actually getting caught. So let's just think about this a little bit. Here we have a lot of boats out there. This is the highest level, and we have a lot less fish getting caught. In the intermediate level, the 2x, we have that's the maximum sustainable yield. And the lowest amount of boats out there, we have a pretty high level of catch going on. Just intuitively, we want to think about this. We want to compare this 1x to this 4x, right? There are 4 times as many boats out there, but they're catching a lot less fish. So we take those points. These are the effort points. This is the 1x, the 2x, and the 4x, and this is their harvest levels. So this graph, effort versus yield, is taken from these 3 numbers and these 3 numbers. So now we have effort down here. Okay. And we have yield and catch, effort and catch. They take the catch that we had those different catch, and we just multiply that by a price of fish, Norwegian kroner. We multiply that times a type of fish. So now we have money on this axis and effort on this axis. So why I like this, or just walking through these, as you can see, we started with a population model, and we got to a money versus effort model using just a few points. Here's our same points, how much fishing we're doing, and this is how much the benefits are. So here's the maximum sustainable yield point, 47 million kroner getting landed each year, and this is the number of boat years that corresponds to the maximum sustainable yield. So, and we're